In the middle of the 20th century, a single event quietly redrew the global balance of power. It did not look dramatic at first. There were no cities reduced to rubble, no surrender ceremonies, no marching armies paraded before the cameras. Yet in less than 2 weeks, a nation that had dominated the world for generations discovered that its authority was gone. The British Empire, once so vast that the sun never set on it, learned that power in the modern world no longer came from flags, fleets, or history. It came from money, confidence, and creditors. When that confidence vanished, everything else followed. The shock came in November 1956, when Britain was forced to abandon its military operation in Egypt almost overnight. The withdrawal was not caused by battlefield failure. British forces were advancing and, on paper, winning. The real defeat arrived through financial pressure. The United States made it clear that if Britain continued its campaign, American institutions would dump British currency, block emergency financial support, and let the pound collapse. Britain's leaders understood what that meant. Without access to stable currency and foreign reserves, the country could not import enough food or energy to function. The empire folded within hours. The illusion of independence shattered, not under enemy fire, but under the weight of debt. What most people miss is that this moment was not an accident. It was not a sudden betrayal or a freak crisis. It was the inevitable result of choices Britain had been making for decades. The Suez Crisis merely exposed a weakness that had been growing quietly beneath the surface. And that pattern, disturbingly familiar, is now visible again in the United States. To understand why Suez mattered, you have to go back to the height of British power. During the 19th century, Britain sat at the center of the global economy. The pound was the backbone of international trade and finance. Merchants settled accounts in pounds. Governments held pounds as reserves. Contracts, loans, and insurance policies were denominated in British currency. This gave Britain extraordinary flexibility. It could borrow cheaply, spend freely, and run trade imbalances without immediate consequences. Demand for the pound masked deeper structural problems. But dominance does not freeze time. While Britain's currency remained central, its industrial edge slowly eroded. By the late 19th century, the United States had overtaken Britain in total economic output. American factories were larger, faster, and more efficient. American resources were vast. Innovation increasingly flowed from across the Atlantic. Yet the world continued using the pound, largely because changing systems is uncomfortable. Financial habits are sticky, and global infrastructure does not shift overnight. Britain benefited from this delay, mistaking inertia for permanence. The First World War accelerated everything. Britain financed the war through borrowing on a scale never seen before. When the fighting ended, the country had transformed from the world's leading creditor into one of its largest debtors. The United States, once a financial junior partner, now held enormous leverage. Britain faced a crossroads. It could accept a reduced role and rebuild its economy around new realities, or it could pretend nothing had changed. It chose denial. In the 1920s, British leaders made a decision that symbolized this refusal to adapt. They tied the pound back to gold at its old pre-war value, as if the war had never happened. The exchange rate no longer reflected Britain's productive capacity, trade position, or debt load. To defend this fantasy, interest rates were kept high, choking growth and crushing exports. Jobs disappeared. Industry stagnated. Yet the government continued funding global commitments, as though empire were still affordable. When the Great Depression arrived, the contradiction became impossible to hide. Investors saw that Britain's spending, debt, and economic output no longer aligned. Speculative pressure mounted. In 1931, Britain abandoned the gold standard altogether, and the pound fell sharply. For a moment, reality forced its way into policy. But even then, Britain found ways to delay the reckoning. The empire itself became a financial crutch. Colonies were required to hold reserves in pounds and conduct trade through London. Demand for the currency was enforced, not earned. The Second World War deepened the imbalance. Britain emerged victorious, but financially exhausted. Its debt levels were staggering, and survival depended heavily on American support. Still, the mindset did not change. Military commitments remained vast. Prestige projects continued. Leaders clung to the image of global power long after the economic foundation had eroded. By the time the Suez Crisis erupted, Britain's fate was already sealed. The confrontation with Egypt was less important than the reaction from Washington. The United States, now the world's financial anchor, had no interest in supporting old-style imperial adventures. When America applied pressure through currency markets and international institutions, Britain had no defense. Its reserves drained rapidly. The choice was humiliation or collapse. Britain withdrew, and with that decision, the world understood what Britain had refused to admit. The empire was over. This is where the parallel becomes uncomfortable. The United States today occupies a position strikingly similar to Britain's in its final decades of dominance. The dollar, like the pound once did, sits at the center of global finance. International trade, commodities, and reserves revolve around it. This status allows America to borrow cheaply, spend heavily, and maintain an enormous global military footprint. For now, confidence holds the system together. But confidence is not infinite. America's debt has climbed to levels once thought unimaginable. The government borrows not just to invest, but to operate. Interest payments are growing faster than productive spending. The military budget dwarfs that of any potential rival, even as domestic infrastructure and industrial capacity lag behind. Like Britain before it, America is acting as though reserve currency status cancels basic arithmetic. Britain believed its reputation would outlast its balance sheet. America increasingly behaves the same way. Trade deficits are treated as permanent features. Manufacturing has been hollowed out. Consumption exceeds production year after year. The assumption is that the world will always need dollars, just as Britain assumed the world would always need pounds. Yet cracks are forming. Countries are experimenting with alternatives to dollar-based trade. Strategic rivals are building parallel payment systems. Even long-standing allies are hedging. This does not mean collapse is imminent, just as Britain did not fall the moment its economy weakened. Decline is slow, until suddenly it isn't. What makes this pattern dangerous is its timing. Britain's warning signs were visible for decades, but the final loss of autonomy happened in days. One crisis exposed everything. For the United States, the risk is not a specific date or event, but the growing probability that a shock will arrive when financial flexibility is gone. It could be a geopolitical confrontation, a debt standoff, or a loss of confidence in American bonds. The trigger almost doesn't matter. What matters is preparedness. When Britain reached the point where interest costs dominated public finances, options disappeared. Choices narrowed. Power shifted quietly from London to Washington. Ordinary people paid the price through inflation, reduced living standards, and lost security. Empires do not end with speeches. They end with spreadsheets. The final mistake Britain made was not losing a war or misjudging an ally. It was believing that history itself guaranteed relevance. Leaders convinced themselves that past greatness entitled them to future dominance. They dismissed critics, ignored warnings, and labeled realism as defeatism. By the time reality forced its way in, it was too late to soften the impact. The United States now stands at a similar crossroads. The numbers are public. The warnings are frequent. The choice is between adjustment and denial. History does not punish arrogance immediately. It waits until leverage disappears. Then it acts quickly. The lesson of 1956 is not that America will inevitably fall, but that power built on debt and confidence must be maintained with discipline, not pride. Britain learned that lesson the hard way. Whether America will learn it in time remains unanswered. The echo of empire is loud, and the clock, once it starts ticking, rarely stops on its own. Hey everyone! If you enjoyed this video and want to stay updated with more insights on finance, make sure to subscribe to my channel, Financial Coin. And don't forget to hit that bell icon so you never miss our latest videos.